Yeah? Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for coming. My name is Judy Dempsey. It's a great honor to be invited by the Atlantic Council to host probably what's supposed to be only the one session on the idea of Europe, which we can go back to. And I want to just make a few very important points that Elmar Brok, member of the Foreign Affairs Committee in the European Parliament, has to leave punctually at 1 o'clock. But is there any other house little keeping rules? This session is on the record. Don't be shy about tweeting /AC Summit. The next session will begin at 1:15, but I do stress we have to leave at 1 o'clock. This session, let me introduce our distinguished panel. As I said, Elmar Brok, Chairman of the Committee on Foreign Relations at the European Parliament. Very pleased to have you here, Elmar. And on my left, my immediate left, is the Foreign Affairs Minister of Bosnia and Herzegovina, Minister Lagumdžija. Thank you very much for coming. Over there, nobody knows him. It's Damon Wilson, Executive Vice President of the Atlantic Council, and Hannes Swoboda, Head of the Socialist Group of the European Parliament. There's a little traffic problem, but he'll be here imminently. So, without further ado, I want to start this, what I hope will be a very, very lively discussion about Europe. And Europe, the EU, and Eurozone countries, and indeed non-Eurozone countries, and those waiting to join the EU, they certainly got their share of batterings over the past year, not just with the Euro crisis, but as we've seen yesterday, Ukraine's rejection of the very important new association accord with Brussels. Of course, everything happened between now and Vilnius, but it just shows yet another problem that Europe has in its relations with the neighborhood, but particularly its relations with Russia. And I must say, just judging from this conference, what is very reassuring about this very important summit is for once we're not bogged down in America slamming, or the Americans slamming the Europeans. This is a dominant feature in some of the EU countries at the moment because of the NSA affair. It's refreshing to have concrete proposals on how to make things work in what is combustible parts of our neighborhood. So without further ado, Minister, would you like to make any one or 2 points what you would, how you see the big challenge facing Europe in the context, of course, where you come from?
Well, thank you very much. I want to thank to you, Judy, for chairing this event. I want to thank the Atlantic Council, for making this gathering. And of course, we are talking about energy and economy, but since we are talking about inflection point, potential inflection point in the European Union, I think that we should start from the perspective that economy and energy is the tool for the goal that we want to make. And the goal in the European Union should be something which is European Union about. What is the core business, or what are the core values about the European Union? Core values are embodied in United in Diversity motto. United in Diversity motto is something which is maybe today somehow also called shared society. And the goal of European Union and the globe should probably go in direction of going to the shared society. In that context, I think that we are in a need for seeing how inflection point is not going to happen in technology or in economy, but how it will happen in a social sphere, in institution building, and in the core values of European Union. In that context, I see enlargement as one of the strategies that with these tools, economic growth, energy efficiency, and things that we're talking about, are our strategy to hit the real goal. And the goal is shared society in Europe. Enlargement is the key word for it.
That's very, I'm glad you bring up this question of enlargement. Do you agree, Elmar Brok?
I think I can understand these ambitions, and I see that this perspective of membership in the European Union is a very important question for the development in such countries. It was very convincing what the Turkish Deputy Prime Minister yesterday said, to use European benchmarks for the internal reform of a country, which you have to do anyway, even if you do not want to join the European Union. That should not be forgotten. The question of democracy, the rule of law, the development of the market economy, and all that questions, and have therefore this economic and political and social stability within the country, which is very much important. And therefore, I think the European Union has provided that. But you have to see that the European Union has done an incredible job in the last 20, 25 years. As I became member of the European Parliament, we were 9 members, now we are 28. And we have the ambition to be a political union, not just a free trade area, which means that the danger of our stretching is there and that the institutions are work, that we are stable enough for internal development in order to meet the challenges. And here this we bring together, and therefore I believe that we go with the Western Balkan countries forwards. Croatia is now a member of the European Union. I think that's an important sign that our doors are open. We will start membership negotiations with Serbia next year. And therefore it is a step-by-step solution. Bosnia and Herzegovina has still to do some homework, as you know, and I think that's a good perspective, and I think we should much more concentrate on that and go forward with that and find also constructive solutions with Turkey. And we have seen that it's more difficult for us than for others. We've seen these days the Russian reconquista, when we hear what has happened in Ukraine. That is reconquista. We have to be aware of that, but they can do it with money and without any conditions which have to do with the rule of law and democracy. And that is the advantage. But here we cannot do that because we can do it only on the basis of the rule of law and democracy. And that's a big difference. And here I think we have to get a clearer strategy. I believe that our Eastern Partnership strategy was politically much too weak, is too weak, and has concentrated on nitty-gritty things sometimes in developing such countries. And here we have to become much better. That is the lesson of yesterday.
Certainly expand, open this out to the audience, this whole idea of whether the European neighbourhood policy is actually the right one. Damon, the transatlantic relationship is clearly important when it comes to enlargement. I mean, we have the 2 Euro-Atlantic pillars. Do you see this being continued over the present time? Is this a concern of yours that it might be weakening, this dual pillar always supported by the United States? And we just welcome our guest, Hannes Swoboda. Thank you very much for coming. Yeah.
Absolutely, Judy, I do think we've seen very much a weakening of this whole strategy. I mean, we have to put this in context to remember, since World War II, our entire strategy in America, the American project has been to create the European project, a Europe whole, free and at peace, in which our interests, American interests, were very much fueled by this idea of NATO and European Union enlargement to help solidify a continent and create an environment in which American forces would never have to return to combat. What we've seen over the past few years is the energy has fallen out of this path. The vision has sort of been buried, if you will, a bit. And I think we're actually at a pretty important inflection point in this particular conversation. What we've seen in the run-up to the Eastern Partnership is the European Union reaching out to the East on its own. It's an important initiative, an important game in town. But the lesson that I think we're seeing in a situation like Ukraine is that if we go into this half-heartedly, it will fail. And I think that's where we are right now. Europe's divided on what its ultimate ambitions are in terms of its outreach to the East. And underlying that, the United States is in the back seat. Historically, every round of European integration has been driven by U.S. leadership on this. This will fail if the United States sits on the sidelines. And so I think we actually need a coherent strategy towards Europe's East in which the United States drives forward the NATO agenda in terms of enlargement, but very much stands behind in a forceful way the European Union's efforts to reach out to the East, which is rightly trying to do. But as we see, at the end of the day, the issues that we're going to bump up against, they're underlying security issues. And so the Eastern Partnership doesn't even begin to address these, and that's why the United States needs to work hand in hand with Europe on it.
President Swoboda, thank you for coming. Can I pick up one of the points that Damon made? Being in the European Parliament and very much aware of the big foreign policy challenges, do you worry about this, about the United States taking the back seat on some issues when it comes to Europe?
Yes and no. Yes, of course, because we want to have the United States close alliance with the European Union on many of the issues. No, in the sense that we have to take our own responsibility. We cannot always rely on the US to do a job we have to do. And as was just said, I think we have to be united. You have to be stronger. You have to be speaking with one voice. We have to have a clear strategy, which was not always the case. So it is a big chance. This also the crisis we see now with Ukraine, with Russia regaining, let's be honest, regaining some power and influence. We have to say, okay, now we only can have that kind of influence if we do our own job in Europe.
I'd like to throw this out to the audience. These are very nice words, and we have to do our own job, but we have been saying this for many, many years. And I think one of the weaknesses, if I may just interject as the moderator, is that the Europeans don't have a collective European security strategy. We don't think strategically on how we deal with the neighborhood, let alone globally. The Chinese are experts at playing off member states against each other, as indeed Russia, although I must admit Germany has become, under Chancellor Merkel, much more willing to confront Putin, so maybe there's a makings of a coherent EU policy there. But I would like to ask the audience, can Europe even deal with its own region at the moment if it is still divided? I would like you to, I'll take one or two questions, 3 questions at a time. Please identify yourself and please have the questions very focused. Thank you. You, Mr. Van. Yes, Mr. Brown.
Thank you very much. I'm Asim Mollazadeh, Member of Parliament of Azerbaijan. Events just on eve of Vilnius summit show us that Russia was really very successful because during the last few years, Russia established a foundation promoting democracy in former Soviet countries and using human rights issue just to postpone accession of former Soviet countries like Ukraine, Georgia, Moldova to EU. Should we understand, my questions to members of EU Parliament, Mr. Brok and Mr. Swoboda, should we understand the decision of EU on Ukraine as a support for Putin's plans to create Eurasia Union and just to restore Soviet Union in new form? Is it happened because of lack of US leadership in this part of the world and problem of transatlantic cooperation after Snowden operation?
A very important question. I'll take 2 more questions and then I'll ask the panel to deal with them, please. It is an important question of how Europe does deal with this so-called customs union. Yes, please. A microphone here, please. It's coming. Got stuck in traffic.
Nikita from the European Parliament. I would like to ask the panel, NATO is the mechanism that deals with security and defense of Europe. IMF is a mechanism that supports Europe now with the economic crisis. So, should we give a priority to Euro-Atlantic relations before we move into a united Europe?
I like that question. And the third question before we hand it over to the panel, please. And if there isn't a third question at the moment, then I can hand it over. Richard, do you have No. Sure. Yeah, Richard. Richard Gorosian.
Richard Giragosyan from Armenia, which was the first sacrificial pawn in the Russian reassertion. My question, though, is actually what now? In the prelude to the Vilnius summit next week, which many of us will be at, is there an opportunity now to resist and empower the remaining countries of the Eastern Partnership in terms of what is a Russian reassertion of power within the near abroad and a shift in policy by Russia to draw a line in the sand? What is your recommendation? Do we strengthen the Eastern Partnership and try to resist further Russian, a resurgent Russia, or is it too late? Thank you.
Interesting questions. Elmar Brok, would you like to kick off with any question you choose to answer?
Yes, I think it's a question which I partly answered already in my first point. The European Union is not just a free trade area. It's a political union with values and own Charter of Fundamental Rights. It's a legal entity with its own court. And someone who wants to join that or who wants to go on that way to join it has to fulfill certain criteria. The United States would also not accept the 51st state, which is not a full democracy and the rule of law. That has to be understood, and sometimes in America it's not understood, that this is a problem in that strategic way, and but that it's not solvable in that way. And then on the other side is the Russian pressure, which, for example, led in Ukraine into the situation that they lost 25% of their trade in the last few months to Russia, with even more pressure on that field, the question of energy prices, then that it's all used against international law, against the Helsinki Accord, against WTO as a political weapon, and we cannot answer that in a proper way. It's the question, and the democracy is not an alibi. It's a condition. For us, also, all our member countries have to do so. And that's, I think, the difference in thinking. Therefore, Azerbaijan has decided not to make an association agreement, but just a strategic partnership agreement to have more openness, not to have a democracy. And I can understand that. And Armenia could not join because of the Nagorno-Karabakh question and the threat it has and the protection they need from Russia. That was a pure blackmailing situation as an Armenian president went to Moscow. And therefore, I think in all these cases, we have to develop our relationship to that. That does not mean, in my opinion, on the situation that we should close doors. We should continue our relationship with such countries on a level which is politically possible, for example, and help them to develop in a certain direction. Where visa facilitation, that question is an important thing. If young people can travel, it has a lot of impact of thinking. And I believe that's an important point. But I would like to also to say that Europe does a lot. Alone from the European budget, we give to non-military foreign aid to enlargement countries, neighborhood countries, and many other else. Annually, 3 times so much money as the United States does give on foreign aid. Alone for the neighborhood policy, it's around 14 billion euros in this financial period. By far not that what the United States gives to such countries. By far much more than the United States gives to such countries. 60% of all, only from the EU budget, not the national budget, and 60% of all developing aid of the world is given by the European Union and its member states. So we do a lot. It's not enough, but we do a lot, and therefore, but I believe people who give less should not then say European Union is too weak to do that.
Well, it is an important point about development aid, but it depends also how you target that development aid, as we have seen European Union's policies before the Arab Spring. Foreign Minister, could you pick our European parliamentarian trying to say, should we look at, if I understand your question correctly, the EU, should we deal with our own regional problems first before the EU, NATO, before fixing or building on the EU-NATO relationship? Do you see that they're complementary or they should be separated? We should look at our own problems first. I hope I'm interpreting your question correctly. Well, would you like to ask it again? Am I interpreting your question correctly? Oh, good. Okay. Minister, thank you.
Like every question, when we interpret it in some way, right? And the answer will be in some way. But I really do think that when it comes to NATO and EU enlargement, and I was talking about enlargement as a case, for example, for us, for example, for the countries that are that want to be members, that are part of enlargement process, hopefully. When it comes to Southeastern Europe, I mean, I think it's a good example. We have, if I can put it, 3 foreign policy goals, which are at the same time 3 internal policy tools of transforming ourselves. We heard about a lot of homework has to be done. We know that a lot of homework has to be done. Conditionality in sense of homework is something which is unavoidable. Of course, we have to consolidate. I mean, us and the European structures have to consolidate, because we heard just in the last 20 years, 21 years, EU jumped from 9 to 28, but job is not finished. For us, it is important to say that regional cooperation is our foreign policy tool and goal for every country in the region. Regional cooperation. I can say that because Elmar was talking about some cases from Serbia, Croatia getting in, and so on and so on. If you would judge, let's say, the state of cooperation in Southeastern Europe, it has never been better in the last 20 years among any individual countries, and especially when you took that as a sum. Because regional cooperation, number one. Number two, NATO, because countries are either in NATO or aspiring to be in NATO. And number three is European Union, homework, European Union homework. What I do think is that when it comes to NATO, let's say it's shorter way. And at the same time, NATO is something which we could call a fear killer factor, because the region was mostly damaged and our homework was a lot of times politicized because of the fears and prejudices and fears of the past. So NATO is something which is definitely a precondition or important condition for speeding up EU path. In that sense, I see that there is synergy in between those. And the final point, I do think that when you look at the economic figures, I mean, you see that in 2013 and 2014, according to IMF Outlook, the growth of EU countries is going to be 0.3 up to 1.4. When it comes to emerging Europe, you have 4 or 5 times even bigger growth rates, which means that when we include everything in a basket, the growth rates are going to be better.
Is this on? Yeah. I think we mustn't lose sight of what we're trying to answer here. You know, what strategies should Europe pursue regionally and globally? And we need to be very focused, not only because of what's taking place in the United States. I mean, clearly the Obama administration, leaving aside its foreign policy strategic shift, really is really focused on the domestic issue, which should give Europe a chance to actually take stock of coming up with a long-term strategy towards its region first, and I think globally. And you know, I would like to get some feedback from the audience, you know, how they see the need for strategy. Is there a need for strategy? We have a defense meeting coming up for the first in 7 years, a summit in December, and there's 28 different strategy papers on the table. Yes, please. Wait for the microphone.
Thank you. I'm Salpi Ghazarian, also from Armenia. Judy, I'd like to take a stab at what you were saying a few minutes ago about what now, especially from the perspective of those of us who now feel completely without levers in this process of democratization. I'm wondering if this is too simplistic a suggestion, and that is that so much of what is happening is really culture. This morning, the Secretary said that Europe now is being... Statoil provides more gas to Europe now than Gazprom. And my first reaction was, I wonder how much of that is social issues driven, culture issues driven, rather than economics driven. You know, speaking the same negotiating language, feeling the transparency being more useful and so forth. Mr. Swoboda had said to The Guardian this morning that not only does he deplore the Russian pressure, but also the Ukrainian willingness to succumb to pressure. How much of that is cultural? Is it possible to think that Europe might, for our region, for our would-be democratizers, Europeanizers, that it's not about technical assistance, it's not about government support, it's about education and media?
Thank you very much for that question. Damon, would you like to take this up? I see you nodding there, and then...
Sure. If I could pick up on the question here as well as the previous round of questions. Let's understand what just happened. I mean, we've just seen the opportunity missed, a historic window missed to lock in Ukraine's strategic orientation towards Europe, away from the idea of Eurasian authoritarian kleptocracy towards European democratic prosperity. Fundamentally, that's what's at stake right now. But it's happened because of a strategy of coercion, blackmail, and weakness on the part of Ukraine. The same happened in Armenia. And in some respects, these are short-term tactics that are successful, have been successful for our Russian colleagues. It's not a long-term strategy of success. Over time, what we're talking about in the Eastern Partnership and the idea of European integration is the idea, I mean, what's at stake is the sovereignty between the countries of the European Union and Russia. And over time, what we're learning is that basically real sovereignty is going to require greater genuine democracy, because the beauty of the Eastern Partnership and the whole concept here is that the decisions that individuals take about their economic decisions, their travel decisions, their cultural decisions, over time is forging their identity as part of a broader Europe. And what next? What's on the table has been muddled. the European Union has extended an Eastern Partnership that had a very ambiguous outcome. This was not about enlargement. This was not about offering the prospect of membership to these countries. What the European Union was saying was, pay the cost up front. Pay all the cost up front of coming towards us without the guarantee of long-term benefit of moving towards membership. Now, I think that's inevitable, but it wasn't part of the formula. So what's next is clarity in EU policy that says, you know what, we're serious about this. You're going to have to pay some costs to compete economically, but we really are putting on the table the prospect of membership ultimately for those of you who actually do follow through on reform, so that the benefit is precise, not abstract, and at the same time parallel that with a much more coherent, cohesive U.S. strategy to back it up, where the U.S. is in this game playing the right supporting role to help anticipate and mitigate some of the pressures that these countries are going to be under.
Yes, Hannes, bitte.
Well, I think basically we should, of course, support the countries who still want to come into the real neighborhood policy, like Moldavia and hopefully Georgia. We see how they react now themselves, but they need even more support now as the big partner Ukraine is missing. But coming back to the question, I think we should be realistic. Our promise for democracy with economic and social development, it's not so easy to implement. Even inside the European Union, look into some development in Romania and Bulgaria and some other countries as well. So this naive concept, you get money, you come, you join, and everything will go well, is very, very naive. And I think we should have a plan B, now elaborate at least, because the economic relations, of course, are important with Russia and with Ukraine. We should try to have reasonable negotiations with them on the future, but of course we need a reliable partner. For me, Mr. Yanukovych, to be very frank, is not a reliable partner. Because then we start again the next talks about the next thing, and maybe after 2 years he says, no, I don't want anything.
Yeah.
So if we have reliable partners in Ukraine, of course, we should really continue the discussions, especially with the citizens, because many of the citizens will be disappointed about the course Mr. Yanukovych took, and the citizens we should not let alone.
I absolutely agree with you on this, and I want to throw out this idea. I mean, it's too easy to use the cliche missed opportunity, but next year Europe could fundamentally change because of the elections of the European Parliament. And the European Parliament could return quite a lot of populist or anti-enlargement MEPs, and we have to be very careful. Then we'll have a new team coming into the Commission, and new heads of the EU institutions. So there'll be a settling in period on the one hand, and a very unpredictable Parliament towards enlargement on the other. So this again feeds into the question, you know, this kind of strategy that Europe needs, despite all the institutions, we are lacking this strategy, you know, regardless of whether our interlocutors are not reliable partners, we have to have a strategy towards the region. And I'd be interested to hear, again, I have to go back to this question because the wall is in front of us. We need a strategy to deal with Russia and our neighbours, let alone the Middle East. And if anybody has a unique idea or a contribution, certainly throw it at the panel. It's very, very important now because there's a lot of unknowns out there in the coming.
I mean, the premise of your question was, should you let Europe get its neighborhood right before you take on a broader global strategy? I think that's absolutely incorrect. I think we're in trouble if we lose Europe to both its own internal wrangling over economic crisis as well as political leadership, or just limit Europe's ambition to how to deal with its immediate periphery. The premise of our conversation here is Europe at a global inflection point. We would argue, the Atlantic Council, that it's the transatlantic community at a global inflection point. The work that we've done in preparation in part for this summit, some of our past work with the National Intelligence Council, by the year 2030, Asia surpasses North America and Europe combined across a range of global indicators. That's not necessarily a bad thing, but it could be a bad thing. The inflection point that we've been arguing is that now is the time for the United States with Europe to come together to help forge this future that we're going into, to lay the groundwork for our long-term competitiveness. We don't have the luxury to focus only on the future of Ukraine. It's a challenge of how the United States and Europe work on shaping this world we're going into.
Damon, I agree with you, except when you listen to the debate in Europe, there isn't a debate about the transatlantic relationship. And when you listen to the discussions now about TTIP, which potentially could be the makings of a new liberal Western order. It's what can I get out of this? What are they don't trust each other. I mean, we see what some of the member states are already fighting for. So I actually feel that even Europe to think strategically about the region, it cannot do so unless it actually addresses where the transatlantic relationship is going to go. And these questions are not being asked at the moment, which is quite extraordinary, that given how both sides need each other even more with the huge big trade issues and the political issues, and especially the energy issues.
For that, we would know what the United States wants also, because it's not only one side, because there is a movement in the United States rather in the direction of the Pacific, with many of the trade relations and many other issues, and I can understand that. I don't deplore it. Also, we have to go in some way. So I think it can only be in a dialogue between what role the U.S. should and wants to play in the next, let's say, 20 years still in the region, including in the Arab world, Middle East, and so on. And then we can discuss, of course, what bigger and increasing role Europe has to play. This is, I think, one answer we have to give both, because we cannot do it one-sided in Europe, but of course you are absolutely right. We did not think enough about what we should offer the US that we in future play in that region with a decreased role of Europe in that region and an increased role, decreased role of the United States in that region and an increased role of the United States in the Pacific region.
Okay, let me pick you up on this then. Since we have assumed for so long since the Second World War that the Americans would look after security, and they've done incredible things to rebuild a post-war Europe, what should the Europeans then be saying to the administration now if we want to build a new transatlantic relationship? What would you put on the agenda? What would you have, not a shopping list, nothing so crude, but what would you like to say? Look, we don't want to ask you for anything, but this is how we consider the relationship. What would you say? Elmar?
I think these TTIP negotiations have an importance in that. TTIP is not just for trade and economy. TTIP has a strategic importance. It's a political instrument. The closer we integrate the economy in the United States and Europe, the more we can set up common standards, the more we can get rid of non-tariff barriers, the more we will be able to set standards for other parts of the world, which has an incredibly economic importance. But it brings the United States and Europe closer together, combines interest. After the defense question, after NATO has not this emotional importance anymore to keep things together, we have to build it on that level to have deeper grounds in our relationship, and therefore I think this TTIP negotiation is very important. If we are able, and the Americans are able to solve the small questions of data protection and privacy, which is, in our opinion, a certain condition to have something like that. And then, that is then a body of strength. This is 35% of merchandise trade. It's 57% of the GNP of this world, which is then together. If that can have a common economic-based political language, then I think we go forward, and within that the European Union has to consolidate itself with its members now to make it work, to overcome the crisis where we're on a good way, then they have on that basis also a stronger role. And this is, I think, very much important, which not leaving out other countries, as we have shown now in the case of Croatia. But I believe that there was too much ambition in the place. Perhaps we should not talk all the time in the first moment about membership. We should talk about for things like, for example, it was done with the EFTA countries about European Economic Area and such questions, where countries can move easier in, and then let's see whether it is as a permanent step or it's a step to go forward. But if you see which role in the internal market, in Schengen and all that questions Norway or Switzerland play, that might be a way for many countries to go first there, or like Finland and Austria did it, and Austria went to that in full membership in Finland and Sweden. So look also for intermediate steps, but strengthen the core group in order to make it able to run the things. Otherwise, if the core group is weak because it becomes too big, then nothing is won.
It's a very interesting point. Minister, you wanted to say something on this. Thank you for this.
I do think that
there are, let's say, 3 layers of potential inflection point. One layer is technology, and we know a lot about it. When it comes to the technology, European Union, Europe in general, can do a lot in doing, let's say, that path to do inflection point in technology. Energy is about it, digital e-governments, connectivity and these things. That's something that is going on. Second layer is economic inflection point. And of course, there are a lot of talks about it. But the third, which Madam just had a question about the culture and about social changes, I think this is where European Union can show that's where EU is the best at. It's values, it's social changes, it's culture, it's diversities being together, flourishing. That's actually what today's globe is facing with. The globe is today facing the threats of having segregated versus, let's say, inclusive societies, shared societies versus exclusive societies. So the overall globe has that problem. And that's something which we have to look at why we are doing this. We are doing this all because we want to sort out that problem. We want to have a globe living in harmony as a shared society. European Union has to show that European Union is able to take a leadership in it. And Southeastern Europe is excellent example of it. I'm coming from the country which has 4 million people who is challenged with the shared society versus segregated societies, political, economic, and whatever those issues. So I think that European Union needs inflection point in showing that, yes, we Europeans, even us who are not in EU, we Europeans are someone who can show that there is inflection point which we are heading the globe.
Okay.
About the shared society.
It's very, very interesting. The gentleman just before you, and then the lady there behind the gentleman. Please, I'll take the 2 questions together. Stay. And the lady beside you. Go ahead, please.
Alexander Herjasi from International Affairs Geneva. Thank you very much for your insight on this inflection point. And Mr. Swoboda rightly so underlined, economy and politics are not the only points of inflection. European Union is at the heart of a fantastic experience, and I can talk knowingly because I represent an academic institution, in regards to scientific and research exchanges. It happens the city of Geneva is also housing CERN, which is around the collider, brings in people from around the world, be it from the United States and the excellent track of Fulbright program or European Union's Erasmus program. We see that human capital is at the heart of the role European Union is playing internally when it comes to its own integration, bringing people around same value systems and scientific knowledge and scientific inquiry. But it also has become almost a normative power when it comes to science and scientific exchange. So there's also a very strong impetus to put an accent on that peculiar point of human capital. And I think that that's something that needs to be inquired and worked on in the future.
Yes, thank you very much for that. And yes, perfect.
My name is Maria Pineda, and I'm with the CCS Alliance and also affiliated with UCLA and the Naval Postgraduate School. My question is, and I studied in Europe, so my question is that the Financial Times has just published yesterday that by 2030, and actually following what Mr. Wilson was saying, that the challenges we face collectively for 2030 is that Asia is going to surpass all of us in many indicators. One of the main challenges, apart from the inflection point of technology, economy, society, and culture, is a blood challenge. And the Financial Times says that we need 20 million young workers and young labor force that is going to not only help grow, but maybe not, but just equalize what is going to be lost. So what is the plan for Europe and what is the strategy for Europe to be able to keep that competitiveness?
Good.
18 years is just the time of a high school graduate. So what are we going to do about that?
Super question. Thank you, and thank you for the question before you. There was one, please, microphone here. I thought there was somebody at the back as well, no? No. Here. And then we'll put this to the panel.
Thank you very much. Hasan Selim Özerten from International Strategic Research Organization, USAC. I'd like to ask the Turkey's position in European perspective. Up until now, Turkey, Europe, and US acted together in NATO. Turkey is a member of Customs Union, but a new dialogue has started with the United States and Europe about this transatlantic trade. And Turkey is complaining about its negativities about Customs Union, and its future position is not being discussed in this transatlantic trade. And I suppose there will be a new culture being designed for the future of Europe and United States, and Turkey is being ignored. Do you see Turkey's place in Europe in the future as important as during the Cold War and post-Cold War period after 2020? Thank you very much.
I'm very glad you asked this question. Shall we work backwards, deal with Turkey first?
I think we should be very honest. My political group, the Socialists and Democrats, are always for Turkey membership, but we have to see the reality. And the reality is that Turkey, in many elements, is moving away from the values and the rules. And if Turkey, for example, it's a small example, goes away from the family of my friends of the European People's Party and goes to the family, well, the AK Party, goes to the family of the ECR, the representatives of the British Conservatives, who are clearly very, very Eurosceptics, and even put the question if they shouldn't leave European Union. So these are clear moves which go away from Europe and not towards Europe. My opinion is, of course, that we should not always look at the relationship between Europe and Turkey on the question membership or not. Turkey is and should be a strategic partner for the European Union and the US. Not an easy one, of course, but nobody in the region is easy. So I think this is another issue we have to think, why I think we should also change our mind. We have Turkey, we have Iran, we have Saudi Arabia, we have Egypt, we have different alliances. We should have an interest, and this is another issue where we should contribute to with the United States, for a new balance of power here. Therefore, and I was recently in Iran, I'm quite optimistic. Let's say I'm very much in favor of giving a possibility to have a solution with Iran. I don't want to rely only on Saudi Arabia and the jihad in this region. I don't want to rely only on a Turkey where I don't know where it is going. I don't want to rely only on Egypt where, again, we don't know where we are going. We have to work together for a new balance in that region, for peace, for cooperation, and against terrorism and the jihadists, who are supported by some of the countries who look so Western, like Saudi Arabia and Qatar. We have to change our mind and to look for that different balance. And for that, we need, of course, a progressive, let's say, open-minded Turkey, but it's not about membership, at least not in the next years. It's about alliance.
Would you like to respond to that? You. Oh yes, your microphone, yes. I'd be very interested to hear how you would. Thank you.
Actually, what I understand from your comments, Turkey is seen as a third partner instead of a family in Europe. But up until now, we were talking about Turkey's perspective of being a member of this family. Turkey is discussing all the European problems together around the table, but now we are assessing Turkey's role as part of being these Middle Eastern countries along with Iran, Qatar, Egypt, and Saudi Arabia. I suppose it's really confusing because instead of letting Turkey to go away, I suppose there is a moral responsibility of Europe to get Turkey back on the table, because if we are talking about an inflection point for Europe, I suppose without Turkey, Europe will be a free trade market instead of being a union which has strategic perspectives in global scale. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Damon, you wanted to butt in there? Interrupt, Oh, you want to, please.
Oh, let him
So
first.
Turkey's government is newly orienting itself. It's not Europe pushing Turkey in a new orientation. It's Turkey himself.
Well, we did drag our feet enough on the negotiations, even during the early days of the AKP. Elmar, you wanted to say something?
No, I think we have now opened a new chapter for the negotiations. The negotiations will continue. We will see how far it goes. It's an open-ended process with the goal of membership, but there might be also solutions in between, as the mandate says, and we should here be practical and go forward. And I believe that a certain condition has fulfilled also from Turkey. I will not now open in 2 minutes the whole problems of membership negotiations. Just use the word Ankara Protocol here. Might be a symbol for that, and what makes it difficult, and therefore it's a good reason that Turkey, for example, will promote the present talks between Northern Cyprus and the Turkish Cyprus part and the Greek Cyprus part to come to a solution to that. And this will be very helpful, and many other questions. They even have said, despite all the progress that was done, Ali Babakan yesterday, that the question of democracy and the rule of law, still steps have to be gone. And that I think it's an important question. But what I believe is that Turkey has to play an important role. I believe that if Turkey has a customs union, should become part of the internal market, as a member or not as a member of the European Union, it should be done a TTIP negotiation that this applies also to Turkish interests, because it's part of the club in that way. Therefore, we should always have in mind what TTIP means in certain questions to Turkey. That's important. Both Brussels and Washington should keep that in mind. And there we have a lot of other examples. For example, I hope that there is a solution with Iran on the nuclear bomb question, that there's no nuclear bomb possible. But that means that Turkey can play an important role as a transit country for energy to Europe in order to organize diversification of what happened with Ukraine. It increases the importance of Turkey for us. And therefore, there are a lot of examples we have to keep in mind to go forward with such questions. But to the 2030 questions, I would like to say, the numbers at the moment go for China. But I see the internal problems China is facing. If I see the problems Brasilia has now to face, and India, the trees never grow to the heaven alone. There are also limits. And I believe at the end of the day, despite the statistics, that the countries who stick to three things together, democracy, the rule of law, this is an important question also for stability of economic development, and a socially oriented market economy. If you put all these things together, and if you do it in a good way and organize this transatlantic market, we will be stronger again at the end of the day, because all these things together are better at the end of the day. They are not so fixed, fast, as sometimes dictatorships or certain regimes can be. And therefore, I have statistics and are there, and that it does not come that way. They were always wrong at the end of the day because the human being was in between.
Oh, the perfectionism is never there. Damon, quick interjection. I want to deal with the competitive issue, and then you're next. Please, Damon, a quick.
Quick on the Turkey point, 3 quick points in response to this conversation. One, I think the turmoil that we're seeing, that Turkey is seeing in its region, on its neighbors to the south, the east, it underscores, I think, for Turkey, the importance of its relationship in NATO and to the European Union. But I think it also underscores for those in NATO and EU the importance of Turkey to them. And so I think we're seeing a potential new impetus here. If you listen to Ali Babajan last night in the conversation with Ambassador Burt, who's here with us, he made a very positive, strong statement about the role that the European Union is doing in helping Turkey continue to advance its reforms internally. It was a substantively important, but also a symbolically important statement of how the AK Party and how Turkey might be thinking about this going forward. The specific point then is that therefore we should be absolutely clear that as the United States and the EU are negotiating a transatlantic trade and investment partnership, that is, we have every intention of extending this to a country like Turkey. And we haven't actually said that, and we need to say that because that's what should happen.
That's a very positive interjection. Just one quick, is this a Turkey follow-up? Yes, please, and then I want to deal with the competitive. Please.
At Daily News, I just wanted to make a comment to Mr. Swoboda's statement. First of all, I think it would be a mistake to equate Turkey to the governing ruling Justice and Development Party. I do believe that the wrong message was given by their choice, but the Gezi events have shown us that Turkey is not about just the AKP. On the contrary, it has shown us that Turkey is much more integrated to Europe than we, the Turks, and you, the Europeans, think we are. So this is number one. Number two, are you awakening now that Turkey is moving away from the values? I'm sorry, earlier signs were there, but the Europeans have preferred to remain silent to them because unfortunately it suits Europeans to remain silent to Turkey's backpedaling on democracy because that stalls Turkey's integration to Europe. Let's face it and operate from the point that Europe is not ready to see Turkey as a member. I accept that fact. I understand the reasoning. But to say that, well, we're not pushing Turkey, Turkey's pushing itself away, I think it's not a responsible attitude. It's not a responsible attitude to keep Turkey at an arm's length. Turkey will remain anchored to EU, whatever happens. And I think the more Turkey remains anchored to EU, the more it will be acting as a soft power to project stability to its region, which is something very positive for European Union as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for that intervention. We've got 2 more minutes.
With the first point, you're absolutely right. It's like with the Ukraine. I hope that there will be another government and other people than Mr. Yanukovych, and I hope there will be other people soon in government in Turkey. But we will see. Secondly, I always have been for continuing negotiations, but I take it as a nonsense of the Council of European Union to start with the regional policies. Because of the Gezi Park, you should start with the chapter 23, 24 about human rights, about basic rights. And energy. For energy, we fight in the parliament since years to start about energy negotiations. Start the important chapters. That would be serious. And therefore, my criticism is going to the European Council, who does such silly things as they do.
It's a really important question. Processes in other member states, hiding behind other member states. Minister, you wanted a quick word. I wanted to pick up, it's only fair to the lady about the competitiveness. Briefly, Europe is in big trouble with TTIP. Because our basic weakness of TTIP, and I know you wanted to discuss the 20 million issue, is that our energy costs are 3 times heavier than the United States. Can you imagine if German industry, which is already saddled with heavy prices, just shipped over everything to the US? There'd be a huge free trade agreement, but what would happen to Europe? It's a thing this is an inflection point. We really have to consider this at the next stage. I'm sorry to have to cut this really interesting debate short. Mr. Brok has to go. President Swoboda, thank you very much for coming. Minister Lagumdžija from all the way from Bosnia, and Damon from US. I've no more housekeeping rules, except I wonder, is the title a bit wrong? Poised at an inflection. I wonder, is Europe going to be infectious one day? Thank you very much.